He really brought his kid to a blind date? The sentence floated through the candlelit air of Rosewood Bistro, like a dart dipped in poison. The words were whispered just loud enough to be caught by nearby tables, followed by the hushed laughter of a small group gathered in the corner. Phones angled slightly, their lenses catching the scene at table 12. A tall, broad-shouldered black man in a clean but worn button-down shirt, holding the hand of a little girl whose curls were tied up with a pink ribbon. Henry Reed heard the comment. He always heard comments like that. They slid into his ears, pressed down on his chest, reminded him of every door that had closed in his face. But tonight, there was Zoe. She was 5, bright as the stars she glued to her school projects, and she looked up at him with trusting eyes that believed he could fix anything. Her other hand clutched a folded napkin where she had been doodling with the single pen she always carried. Rosewood Bistro was not his world. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, wine glasses caught the light like prisms, and servers glided in pressed uniforms. He felt the grime of the city streets still on his skin, though he had scrubbed hard before leaving home. Henry was a supervisor with the sanitation department, a man who worked nights keeping Charlotte clean. This place was where lawyers, executives, and doctors came to seal deals, not where a man like him belonged, and certainly not with a child at his side. He had not planned this. The babysitter canceled at the last minute, leaving him with a choice: break the promise of showing up or bring Zoe along. He chose his daughter. He always chose his daughter. Vanessa, sitting 2 tables away, hid her grin behind a wine glass. Once a coworker, she had made a sport of mocking him for years. Tonight was her masterpiece. She and her friends had set up a fake profile, sent Henry a message about a blind date, then lured him here. Now the trap was sprung. Cameras were rolling. The humiliation would be online before dessert. Henry scanned the room. He could feel the laughter bubbling, not loud but sharp, like glass breaking inside him. He thought of leaving, of taking Zoe's small hand and rushing out into the night. Pride said to get away before the laughter swallowed him whole. But then Zoe's voice, soft and curious, tugged him back. "Daddy, where's the lady we're meeting?" Her innocence cut through his shame. She believed this was real. She believed in him. For a moment he closed his eyes. He saw the streets he swept at night, the trash that piled after football games, the way people avoided his gaze when he wore the uniform. He thought of every time he had been told he was less. And then he looked at Zoe. She was watching him, her face open, waiting for his answer. If he walked out now, what would she learn? That mockery wins, that dignity bows to cruelty. His voice trembled as he spoke, more to himself than to her. "No, baby. We'll sit. We keep our word." He pulled out a chair and guided Zoe into it. Phones lifted higher. Vanessa's group snickered. His hands shook slightly as he laid a napkin across his lap. The weight of 100 eyes pressed down, but Zoe smiled, swinging her legs under the table. She began drawing again on the napkin, her pen scratching simple lines into hope. The waiter approached, polite but stiff. "Good evening, sir. Would you like to order for your party?" There was a pause, subtle but cruel, before the word. Henry met his gaze, steady though his chest burned. "We'll have the mac and cheese for her, and the grilled chicken for me. Water's fine." He spoke clearly, each word a small declaration that they belonged here as much as anyone. Across the room, Vanessa whispered to her phone, "This is gold. Look at him pretending." Her companions giggled, the sound like broken bells. The glow of their screens was a constellation of malice. Henry forced his attention back to Zoe. She held up her napkin drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands. "That's you, me, and maybe the lady we're supposed to meet," she said with the confidence only a child could have. His heart ached. He wanted to tell her the truth, that there was no lady, that this night had been designed to break him, but instead he managed to smile. "It's beautiful, Zoe, just beautiful." Wonder. Inside, though, he felt the storm. He thought of Aunt Loretta's words from years ago when his wife left, and he nearly drowned in grief. "Boy, you don't get to quit just because people laugh. The Lord gave you that little girl to raise, and you'll raise her standing tall." That voice returned now, steady as ever, reminding him who he was. The laughter didn't stop, neither did the filming, but Henry made his choice. He would not run. He would not let Zoe see him broken. He sat upright, his shoulders square, his eyes forward, Phones could capture his face, but they would not capture defeat. He reached for Zoe's hand across the table, squeezed it gently, and whispered, "We're just fine, baby, just fine." And in that moment, though he didn't know it yet, the decision to sit down in dignity would change everything. The laughter did not die down after Henry placed their order. If anything, it grew bolder, the chuckles slipping from the corner table like smoke, filling the room with an invisible haze that only he and Zoe seemed to breathe. He kept his face forward, but his ears caught every note of ridicule. The phones tilted again and again, little red dots flashing, proof that this night would outlive the restaurant and resurface in some cruel montage online. He felt the sting of sweat behind his neck even in the cool air conditioning, the prickling burn of being put on display like an exhibit. Zoe leaned over her napkin, tongue poking out in concentration as she drew. She was untouched by the poison in the air. She trusted him to make it safe. That was what kept him rooted to the chair when everything inside screamed to get up and leave. The waiter returned with bread and water, setting it down quickly, avoiding Henry's eyes. It wasn't hostility, no, it was worse, a polished indifference, the kind that said, "You are here but you are invisible." Henry thanked him softly. The waiter nodded without a word, already looking toward another table filled with laughter that came from wine, not malice. Henry straightened in his chair, his shoulders aching with the effort of holding steady. He thought about walking out. He pictured standing, lifting Zoe into his arms, and pushing through those doors into the night air where the laughter couldn't reach them. For a second he almost rose, but then Zoe's small voice cut through. "Daddy, do you think she's pretty?" He blinked. "Who, Zoe?" "The lady we're supposed to meet. Do you think she'll like me?" Her brown eyes were wide and unguarded, as if the whole evening still made sense to her. His chest tightened. This was why he couldn't go. If he left now, he would leave her with a lesson carved deep. That dignity is fragile, that people like them don't belong in places like this. That was a truth he refused to teach. He leaned closer and whispered, "I think she'd be lucky to meet you, sweetheart." Her grin broke through like sunlight, and for that moment the room's cruel edge dulled. Vanessa's laugh rang out again. "Look at him pretending," she whispered to her phone, her companions leaning in. Henry caught the words but didn't flinch. He tightened his grip on Zoe's hand beneath the table. His mother used to tell him when he was a boy, "Hold steady, Henry. Storms don't last, but your name does." Tonight, he heard those words again. The food arrived. Zoe dug into her mac and cheese with delight, humming a tune she'd learned at kindergarten. Henry cut into his chicken, every motion deliberate, as if this ordinary act of eating was a shield. He forced himself to chew slowly, to breathe evenly, to model calm for his daughter. Every bite was an act of defiance. He would not let Vanessa win by seeing him break. Yet the humiliation gnawed. He felt it with every stolen glance, every half-hidden smirk. He could imagine the captions already. "Single dad brings his kid to a blind date, cheap dinner date." This is what desperation looks like. But he also imagined Zoe seeing those one day, and he promised himself she would never remember this night as shame. She would remember her father sitting tall, facing down laughter, holding her hand. A server passed their table and muttered, "Excuse me," too quickly, almost tripping over Zoe's chair. The girl laughed, oblivious, and Henry managed to smile. He turned that moment into a teaching gesture, whispering, "See, Zoe? Sometimes people bump into you, but you just smile and keep steady." She nodded, soaking in every word. The corner table grew louder, phones now openly pointed. Vanessa leaned back, her laughter sharper, the performance complete. Henry inhaled slowly, chest rising, then looked directly at her for the first time. Their eyes locked. She smirked, triumphant, expecting to see him crushed. But Henry did not look away. He didn't scowl, didn't curse. He simply held her gaze with the same stillness he used on stormy nights sweeping streets, the same strength he used when Zoe cried at night missing her mother. His stare was calm, unbroken. After a long moment, Vanessa's smile faltered, just slightly, as if confused by his refusal to collapse. He turned back to Zoe, who was now asking him to cut her chicken into small pieces. He did it carefully, sliding the plate back to her with a grin. Inside, his heart pounded, but each beat hammered home the same truth. He was staying. He would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing him run. He had chosen dignity, and he would hold it. The meal moved forward, minute by minute. The laughter at the corner table ebbed into chatter about other things. The phones lowered, attention drifting. Henry realized something then. Ridicule is loud at first, but it fades when you refuse to bow to it. Zoe wiped cheese from her lips and leaned against him, whispering, "Thanks for bringing me, Daddy. I like it here." And in that whisper, he knew he had done the right thing. Whatever came later, videos, mockery, consequences, tonight his daughter saw her father choose courage. That was a memory that would outlast any clip online. He touched her curls gently, a silent vow forming inside. No matter how cruel the world, he would never let her see him ashamed of who they were. The clinking of glasses and low hum of conversation at Rosewood Bistro shifted when a tall woman rose from a nearby table. Alexis Cole had been dining alone, her posture straight, her eyes sharp, dressed in a tailored suit, the color of midnight. She had watched the scene unfold, the cruel laughter, the hidden cameras, the way the man at table 12 straightened his shoulders and refused to flee. Most people would have looked away, convincing themselves it was none of their business. But Alexis was not most people. She knew what humiliation looked like. She had worn it once as a young girl from the South Side, ignored by teachers, dismissed by mentors, doubted by investors. That night's echoes pressed against her chest, and she stood before she even realized she had made the choice. She crossed the room, heels striking a rhythm against the polished floor. The laughter dimmed slightly as eyes followed her. She was a woman who drew attention without asking. Stopping at Henry's table, she glanced at Zoe first, softening her voice. "Is this seat taken?" The little girl blinked up, delighted that someone important was speaking to her. Before Henry could respond, Alexis smiled. "I would be honored to join you both for dinner if you don't mind." Henry froze, caught between suspicion and pride. He saw the group in the corner, phones now raised higher, their smirks sharper, waiting to see how he would handle this. He sensed a trap inside a trap. His voice came low, almost clipped. "Thank you, ma'am, but we're fine." He wanted to protect what little dignity remained, not invite more pity. Alexis tilted her head, unfazed. "No one is fine when they're being laughed at," she said, her eyes locking onto his with steady fire. "Sometimes the only way to silence cruelty is to sit beside it." Zoe's hand tugged at Henry's sleeve. "Daddy, let her sit, please. She looks nice." Her innocence pierced through his armor. Henry exhaled, jaw tightening. "Are you sure, Zoe?" She nodded eagerly, and Alexis's smile widened, not triumphant but gentle. She slid into the empty chair, setting her bag carefully by her side, her presence commanding yet calm. The corner table faltered. Vanessa's smirk stiffened as whispers darted around. Who was this woman? Why would she sit with him? Phones kept recording, but the mood shifted. Henry felt the shift too, a strange mix of relief and unease. He wanted to protest again, to tell Alexis she didn't need to get involved, but Zoe was already leaning across the table, introducing herself. "I'm Zoe. I'm 5. I drew a picture. Wanna see?" She pushed the napkin toward Alexis, who studied the stick figures beneath a scribbled rainbow. "This is beautiful," Alexis said warmly. "May I keep it?" Zoe giggled, nodding. Henry cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "You don't have to do this," he muttered. "They'll just twist it more." Alexis leaned in slightly, her eyes fierce yet kind. "Let them twist. Dignity doesn't belong to them, it belongs to you. And tonight, you kept it when most people would have walked out." Henry held her gaze for a moment longer than he meant to. Something in her tone disarmed him, not pity but respect. He nodded faintly, more to himself than to her. Their meals arrived, and the waiter, suddenly more attentive, placed plates with a hint of deference. Alexis ordered coffee, her calm composure pressing the air into new shape. Conversation at Vanessa's table quieted, attention scattered. The performance was losing its audience. Zoe babbled happily about her school project, about the stars she had glued to cardboard. Alexis listened with genuine interest, asking questions, smiling. Henry watched, torn between gratitude and suspicion. Who was this woman who had stepped into his storm without hesitation? The answer didn't matter yet. What mattered was Zoe's laughter filling the space, drowning out the echo of mockery. What mattered was the way Alexis's presence transformed the table from spectacle to sanctuary. For the first time that evening, Henry felt the tightness in his chest ease, if only slightly. He didn't know that this small choice, allowing her to sit, would ripple through everything that came after. He only knew that Zoe was happy, that the laughter in the corner had dimmed, and that somehow, against all odds, dignity had found them at table 12. The meal moved on with a rhythm Henry hadn't expected. Zoe chattered between bites of mac and cheese, showing Alexis her drawings, explaining which stick figure was who and why the rainbow arched above them. "That's Daddy, that's me, and now that's you," she said proudly, scribbling Alexis's hair in dark curls that spilled down past her drawn shoulders. Alexis laughed softly, thanking Zoe as though it were a priceless painting. The sound of her voice carried calm authority, the kind that could fill a boardroom yet soften to meet a child's innocence. Across the restaurant, the cruel laughter from Vanessa's table waned, replaced by restless murmurs as the spectacle dissolved. The attention that had felt like a noose around Henry's neck loosened. He breathed easier, though the weight of the evening still pressed on his chest. Henry cut another piece of chicken, his hands steadier now, while his mind raced. Why had Alexis stepped in? Was it pity? Some impulse to save a stranger? He glanced at her, poised and unflinching under the gaze of others, her presence radiating control. No, it wasn't pity. It was something fiercer. Respect, maybe. He couldn't quite place it, and that unsettled him. Yet Zoe adored her already, leaning across the table with unfiltered joy. "Do you like ice cream?" Zoe asked suddenly. Alexis smiled. "Very much. Coffee flavor, if I can find it." Zoe giggled, announcing, "That's grown-up ice cream." Henry chuckled under his breath despite himself. As plates were cleared, the waiter returned with a little more warmth than before. Vanessa's table no longer dominated the atmosphere. Their phones were lowered, their interest dissolving now that their intended target refused to break. Henry felt a flicker of pride. Not triumph, he didn't care to win against Vanessa, but a quiet sense that he had shielded Zoe from the worst of it. That mattered more than anything. When dessert was offered, Henry shook his head, ready to end the night. He reached for the check, but Alexis placed a card down first, her tone final. "Allow me." Henry stiffened. "That's not necessary. I can cover us." Their eyes locked, a silent battle over pride and gratitude. Alexis's voice softened, but carried iron beneath it. "I know you can. But tonight, let me." After a pause, Henry relented with a nod. It wasn't weakness, it was acknowledgement. Zoe clapped her hands. "That means we can get ice cream somewhere else, right, Daddy?" He smiled at her enthusiasm, but his mind was already turning to leaving. Outside the restaurant, the night air was cool and forgiving. Zoe skipped ahead a few steps, spinning with the leftover energy only children seemed to have. Henry watched her, hands in his pockets, still trying to process what had unfolded. Alexis stepped beside him, her heels clicking softly on the pavement. She studied him with that same calm intensity. "You handled yourself with dignity in there," she said. He gave a short laugh, half bitter. "Is that what they call it?" "Felt more like trying not to drown." Alexis shook her head. "No, most would have drowned. You stayed. Your daughter will remember that long after the world forgets a few cruel laughs." Henry absorbed her words in silence. She continued almost casually. "There's an event this weekend at Maplewood Community Center. We're supporting art and STEM programs for kids. You should bring Zoe. I think she'd love it." The invitation hung in the air, unexpected and heavy with possibility. He opened his mouth to decline habit, told him to retreat, to keep walls up. "I don't think that's for us," he began. But Alexis interrupted gently. "It's for families. It's for everyone." Later that night, after Zoe was tucked in, Henry sat at the small kitchen table of their modest apartment, head in his hands. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. He replayed the evening again and again. The laughter, the phones, the weight of staying seated, Alexis's sudden appearance, Zoe's joy. His pride told him to step back, to protect himself from further embarrassment. But another voice stirred, older, steadier. Aunt Loretta's voice, from countless Sunday afternoons after church, from the days when Henry thought he couldn't go on raising Zoe alone. "Son, you don't let mockery tell you who you are. Mockery fades, character lasts. Stand tall, and your girl will stand tall with you." He closed his eyes, hearing those words as if she sat across from him now. Loretta had always been more than an aunt. She was his anchor, his reminder that dignity is not for sale and not to be surrendered. Tonight, he understood her wisdom more than ever. The next morning, over breakfast, Zoe asked innocently, Are we going to the community thing with Miss Alexis? Henry hesitated, staring at the cereal in her bowl. You really want to go? She nodded vigorously. She said they'll have painting and robots. Daddy, please? Her excitement was impossible to resist. Henry sighed, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. All right, Zoe, we'll go. In that moment, he made the choice. Not for Alexis, not for Vanessa, or the people online. He chose for Zoe, for the lesson she would carry. Dignity wasn't just sitting down when mocked, it was also stepping forward when fear said to turn back. That weekend at Maplewood, doors would open he never expected. But for now, as Zoe hugged him tight, napkin drawing still tucked in her backpack, Henry knew one thing with certainty. His story was no longer just his, it was becoming theirs. Saturday morning sunlight poured across the worn sidewalks as Henry walked with Zoe toward Maplewood Community Center. The red brick building rose modestly at the corner of Maple Lane, its wide front steps filled with children tugging on parents' hands and volunteers greeting families with clipboards. Colorful banners read, "Art and STEM for every child." Zoe skipped beside him, backpack bouncing, her napkin drawing carefully folded inside. Her excitement was contagious, though Henry carried a cautious weight in his chest. He wasn't sure what they were stepping into, but he had promised her, and promises to Zoe were sacred. Inside the center, the atmosphere buzzed with life. The gymnasium had been transformed into a maze of booths, painting stations with easels, tables where kids built towers from blocks, robots scooting along taped tracks on the floor. Murals covered the walls, splashes of color that told stories of hope and community. Zoe's eyes went wide. "Daddy, look! Robots!" She tugged his hand, pulling him toward a table where other children were programming small cars. Henry followed, smiling at her enthusiasm, but scanning the crowd with a sense of unease. He didn't belong to spaces like this, filled with polished parents and volunteers in matching t-shirts. He adjusted the collar of his simple shirt, already feeling the edges of judgment. Then a familiar voice called, warm and confident. "Henry, Zoe, I'm glad you came." Alexis walked toward them, her suit replaced by a simple blouse and jeans, her hair pulled back. Even dressed down, she carried herself with the same quiet authority that had silenced laughter at the restaurant. Zoe ran to her without hesitation, holding up the folded napkin. "Look, Miss Alexis, I brought our picture." Alexis knelt to accept it, unfolding the crumpled paper. She studied the stick figures, Henry, Zoe, and herself, beneath a rainbow and smiled as though it were a masterpiece. "May I keep this? I'd like to hang it in my office." Zoe nodded eagerly, proud. Henry stood back, arms crossed, watching the exchange with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. Around them, staff and volunteers greeted Alexis warmly, with deference that didn't match an ordinary guest. She shook hands, offered hugs, answered questions like someone who belonged at the center of things. Henry's eyes caught a bronze plaque mounted near the entrance. "This facility is made possible through the generosity of the Coal Impact Foundation." His stomach tightened. The name clicked into place, memories surfacing of news articles and business pages. Coal Impact was one of the largest philanthropic funds in the region, known for funneling millions into education and community programs. And Alexis Cole was its founder, its face, its billionaire CEO. The revelation landed heavy. He had let a woman like her sit at his table, pay his check, walk with his daughter. He suddenly felt small, the distance between their worlds stretching wide. His job supervising sanitation crews, his nights spent in reflective vests, his modest apartment, all of it seemed even smaller under the shadow of her reach. She didn't just belong to another world, she built that world, and here he was, broom in hand at night, trying to hold on to dignity in scraps. Zoe didn't notice the shift in his expression. She was too busy tugging Alexis toward the art booth, asking to paint rainbows. Alexis followed happily, rolling up her sleeves, unbothered by smudges of paint. Henry trailed behind, watching her laugh with Zoe, encourage other children, kneel to their level with genuine interest. Staff looked at her with respect, not just as a benefactor but as someone who showed up. That respect was deserved, Henry admitted silently, but it only deepened the chasm he felt inside. He lingered at the edge of the room, hands shoved in his pockets, observing. He couldn't ignore the whispers from other parents. "Is that Alexis Cole? She's here again." They spoke with awe, like she was untouchable. Henry's jaw tightened. He wasn't angry at her. He was angry at the gulf between them, at the cruel joke of fate that had placed them in the same orbit for one night. Zoe needed joy, but he knew this couldn't last. Alexis lived in boardrooms and headlines. He lived on paychecks that barely stretched to rent and groceries. Still, he couldn't deny what he saw. Zoe was radiant, happier than she had been in months, her laughter echoing across the gym. She painted broad strokes of blue sky while Alexis held the paper steady, encouraging every line. For Zoe's sake, Henry pushed the turmoil down and forced himself to smile when Alexis glanced his way. She offered him that same unwavering look of respect, the kind that had unsettled him since the night at the restaurant. It wasn't pity, but respect didn't erase reality. Later, as the event wound down, Henry found himself standing near the plaque again, reading the words he already knew. Coal Impact Foundation. He muttered under his breath, almost bitter. She belongs to another world. He thought of his night shifts, the ridicule he faced, the bills stacked on his counter. He thought of Zoe's drawing now resting in Alexis's hands, destined for an office in a high-rise. And he thought of the cruel laughter at Rosewood, of Vanessa's smirk, of the trap he had fallen into. For a brief moment, he wondered if the joke had only shifted form, that now he was standing in another kind of spectacle, a man out of place, tolerated but not truly belonging. Zoe ran up to him, face smudged with paint, holding Alexis's hand. "Daddy, we're coming back, right? Miss Alexis says they'll have robots again next month." Henry forced a smile, kneeling to wipe her cheek. "We'll see, Zoe, we'll see." His voice was gentle, but inside the conflict raged. He wanted to shield her joy, but he knew walls had to be built before disappointment crashed in. He looked once more at Alexis, who was laughing with children near the exit, and then down at Zoe's eager face. For her, he would endure it. For her, he would step into a world that told him he didn't belong. But deep inside, a single thought remained: she is untouchable, and I am a man who sweeps streets. By Monday morning, the cruel night at Rosewood Bistro had grown far beyond the restaurant's walls. Henry first heard about it when his phone buzzed during his shift. A coworker slapped him on the shoulder, chuckling as he showed the screen. "Man, you're famous now. Look, single dad crashes blind date. That's you, right?" Henry froze, staring at the shaky footage, him sitting stiffly at the table, Zoe drawing on a napkin, laughter echoing faintly in the background. The captions were worse than the images. "Who brings a kid on a date? Desperate much? Typical, chasing sympathy." The comments scrolled endlessly, many laced with venom about his race, his job, his clothes, his chest burned. It wasn't just mockery now, it was judgment from strangers across the country. He shoved the phone back, muttering, "Get that out of my face," and walked off to the storage room, gripping the broom handle until his knuckles ached. The humiliation he had held back at the restaurant returned sharper now. It wasn't fading, as he had hoped. It was spreading, like a stain. By lunchtime, the story had reached his supervisor, Mr. Daniels, who called Henry into his office. The blinds were half closed, the air stale with coffee and paperwork. Daniels leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen. "Henry, we need to talk about appearances. This video, it's all over the place. Our department doesn't need negative attention." Henry stiffened. "It was a setup, a joke. I didn't do anything wrong." Daniels sighed, unconvinced. "Doesn't matter what's true. Perception matters. We're a public service. If you're becoming a distraction, it could reflect badly on the city." The words landed heavy. Henry had worked 10 years to keep this job, to hold stability for Zoe. Now, because of a cruel joke, it was slipping through his fingers. He left the office with his head low, fury and shame tangled inside. Meanwhile, across town, Alexis sat in the sleek boardroom of Coal Impact's headquarters, surrounded by glass walls and views of Charlotte's skyline. But today the view meant nothing. Her board of directors shifted uneasily as clips of the same video played on a tablet. One board member, sharp-suited and gray-haired, spoke first. "Alexis, your involvement here is concerning. The optics are risky. Associating with this man, well, you know how donors can be." Another chimed in, "The internet is brutal. They're already speculating. This could compromise our image of professionalism." Alexis leaned forward, her eyes steady. "You think standing next to a father protecting his daughter compromises us? We're supposed to serve families like his." That's our mission." But she heard the edge in their voices. They weren't worried about mission. They were worried about reputation and money. The conversation dragged her back years, to the engagement that crumbled under similar weight. She had been younger then, deeply in love with a man who believed in her dreams, but whispers grew about class, about race, about whether she was fit to marry into his family. Eventually, under the pressure, he walked away, leaving her heart fractured and her resolve hardened. Tonight those old wounds reopened, raw and aching. She would not let prejudice dictate her choices again. Yet the board's stern faces reminded her that power came with chains, and those chains were tugging now. Henry tried to ignore the growing storm, but it seeped into everything. At the grocery store, two teenagers laughed as he passed, one whispering, "Hey, isn't that the guy?" On the bus, someone glanced at Zoe and muttered about bad parenting. Each encounter chipped away at his resolve. At night, when Zoe was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table staring at the bills, wondering how he could protect her from a world so eager to tear them down. Pride told him to cut Alexis out of their lives entirely. She didn't deserve to be dragged into his humiliation. Alexis, however, refused to back away, though doubt gnawed at her. Each headline that framed her dinner with Henry as a scandal, each whisper from donors, reminded her that history could repeat itself. She remembered the shame of being abandoned once because she wasn't enough for someone else's image. Now she faced the opposite risk, being told that Henry wasn't enough for hers. The irony stung. She spent long nights in her penthouse, staring at Zoe's rainbow drawing pinned to her refrigerator, asking herself why this mattered so much. The answer was simple but terrifying, because for once, it wasn't about optics or legacy. It was about something real. For Henry, the breaking point came late one evening when Zoe asked, "Daddy, why are people laughing at us?" Her wide eyes carried no judgment, only confusion. He swallowed hard, fighting tears he refused to show. "Because sometimes people laugh when they don't understand," he said softly. She tilted her head. "But we didn't do anything wrong." Her innocence was a knife. "No, baby, we didn't." He held her close, silently vowing to shield her from the cruelty he couldn't stop. Yet the more he tried to pull away from Alexis, the more the world tried to pull them together, binding them in a storm neither had chosen. He began dodging her calls, responding curtly when she reached out, convinced it was better to let the distance grow, better to save her from the fallout of his life. Pride was his shield, but inside it felt more like surrender. Alexis felt the withdrawal sharply, her calls unanswered, her offers of support declined. It echoed too much of her past, of love slipping away under the weight of judgment. But this time, she swore, she would not let prejudice decide the ending. Still, the pressure from her board mounted, each meeting filled with veiled warnings. She walked a razor's edge between duty and desire, between the empire she built and the simple, stubborn truth that her heart was pulling toward Henry and his daughter. The storm was only beginning. For Henry, the threats to his livelihood grew louder. For Alexis, the voices of disapproval tightened around her like a noose. Both stood at the edge of choices that could break them. And both, though they didn't yet admit it, knew that walking away would not silence the conflict inside. It would only deepen it. Henry's phone buzzed on the counter again, screen lighting with the same name he had avoided for days. Alexis. He stood over it, arms folded, staring at the glow, until it went dark. Zoe was in the living room, building towers from blocks, humming softly. The sound of her voice soothed him, but it didn't quiet the battle raging in his chest. Every time Alexis called, every time he ignored it, he felt something twist inside. She didn't deserve the chaos his life had become. Better to cut it off now, he told himself. Better she walk away before the storm consumed her too. Still, when the phone finally went silent, the apartment felt emptier, colder. At work, the whispers had not stopped. The viral video lingered in the feeds of people who had never set foot in Charlotte. Henry overheard a crew member laugh. "That guy's the star of the internet. Bet he's trying to ride her coattails." Rage burned in Henry's gut, but he swallowed it down, broom moving across the sidewalk in steady strokes. Pride was the only armor he had left, and he wore it even when it cut into him. Across town, Alexis sat at her desk long after the boardroom emptied. Papers lay untouched, her mind elsewhere. The silence of her office was broken only by the hum of the city below. She had lived this before the weight of judgment, crushing something fragile before it could grow. Years ago, her fiancé's family had whispered she was unworthy, and the man she loved eventually agreed. The memory still haunted her, not because of the love lost, but because of the lesson it seared into her soul. People would always measure her worth by their own scales, never by her truth. And now it was happening again, only in reverse. They measured Henry, a man of grit and humility, and found him lacking. She clenched her fists, furious at their blindness, but what terrified her most was Henry's silence. His retreat felt like a slow unraveling, thread by thread, until nothing remained. Then came Vanessa's next move. One evening, Henry received a text from a coworker. "Check Facebook Live. You're trending again." Against his better judgment, he opened the link. There was Vanessa, sitting in her car, camera angled just right, her voice dripping with mockery. "So let me get this straight. Some sanitation guy thinks he can bag himself a billionaire CEO by dragging his kid to dinner? Y'all, this is what a gold digger looks like when he's broke." Laughter filled the background from whoever rode with her. Comments streamed across the screen. Laughing emojis, GIFs, lines like, "He's hustling for child support, and she'll come to her senses." Henry's vision blurred with shame and fury. He wanted to throw the phone across the room, but Zoe was watching TV nearby, and he couldn't let her see him break. The stream spread quickly, shared and reshared, until Henry's face became a meme. His dignity, the thing he had clung to in that restaurant, was torn apart in digital pieces. That night, when Zoe asked if Alexis was coming over, Henry forced a smile. "Not tonight, Zoe. Maybe not for a while." She frowned, confused. "But she's nice. She likes us." He kissed her forehead, his throat tight. "Sometimes nice people live in a different world, baby. Sometimes they can't stay." She didn't understand, and he prayed she never fully would. Alexis saw the live stream too. Her assistant had tried to shield her, but it was impossible to avoid. She sat on her couch, the glow of the phone painting her face in cold light. Vanessa's words replayed, cruel and deliberate. Alexis scrolled through the comments, her stomach turning. She knew public opinion could be fickle, but the brutality shocked even her. And worse, she knew Henry would see it, feel it, absorb every poisoned word. Her chest ached with helplessness. She dialed his number again, desperate to hear his voice, to reassure him that none of this mattered. Again, no answer. For Henry, the silence became a refuge. He convinced himself it was strength, protecting her from the ugliness now attached to his name. He told himself she deserved better, someone whose presence didn't invite ridicule or threaten reputation. Pride twisted into resignation, and resignation into isolation. Yet deep inside, every missed call carved a hollow space he couldn't fill. He thought of her sitting at that restaurant table, calm under fire, choosing to sit with him when no one else would. That image warred with the noise of the internet, leaving him torn between what he knew was true and what the world insisted was real. At work the next day, someone shoved their phone under his nose. "She's too good for you, man. Internet's got it right." Henry pushed the phone away, his voice low and firm. "Mind your business." But inside, the words echoed, "Too good for you." He had thought the same thing at Maplewood, standing under that plaque with her name. Now it felt like the universe agreed. That night, after Zoe fell asleep, Henry sat in the dark apartment, staring at the ceiling. He whispered to himself, barely audible, maybe the only way to protect her is to let her go. It was a lie he didn't want to believe, but it was the only one that made sense. The week dragged on with a heaviness Henry could not shake. Each day felt longer than the last, each glance from a stranger heavier with suspicion. Even those who said nothing seemed to carry the video in their eyes, a flicker of recognition that twisted his insides. He came home one evening to find Zoe at the table with crayons spread out, her little hands smudged with color. She looked up at him with a question that pierced through his armor. "Daddy, is Miss Alexis still my friend?" Henry froze in the doorway, his jacket half off his shoulders. He wanted to answer quickly, to say yes without hesitation, but the words caught in his throat. He sat down beside her, watching her draw another rainbow across the page. "Of course she's your friend," he said at last, forcing a smile. "Why would you ask that?" Zoe shrugged, her voice small. "Because you don't talk to her anymore, and friends talk." Her innocence was brutal. Henry stroked her curls gently. Sometimes grown-ups get busy, Zoe. Sometimes they live in different worlds, but she's still your friend. Zoe looked at him skeptically, as if even at 5 years old she could sense the gap between his words and his heart. "I like her," she whispered. "She makes you smile." Henry kissed her forehead, whispering, "I like her too." But he turned away quickly, hiding the storm in his chest. Across the city, Alexis stood in the coal-impact boardroom again, facing the sharp gazes of men and women who thought they knew her better than she knew herself. The room was cold despite the sunlight pouring through the glass walls. A folder lay open on the table with headlines from the past week. Billionaire seen with viral sanitation worker, Cole's reputation questioned amid online scandal. The chairman adjusted his tie, speaking carefully but firmly. "Alexis, we must insist on clarity. The foundation cannot afford distractions. Your association with Mr. Reed has become exactly that." She clenched her fists under the table, nails digging into her palms. "Association?" she echoed. "You speak as though he's a liability, not a human being. He's a father, a good one." The chairman's expression didn't waver. "Perception is reality in our world. If donors question your judgment, projects suffer, children suffer. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good." His words cut sharper than intended, but Alexis heard them all the same. Sacrifices. Always sacrifices. Years ago, her fiancé had sacrificed her for the approval of his family, leaving her heart shattered. Now they expected her to sacrifice Henry, to erase him as though his dignity meant nothing compared to numbers in a ledger. When the meeting ended, she remained in her chair long after everyone else left. She stared at Zoe's rainbow drawing pinned inside her notebook, its childish lines brighter than the city beyond the window. Her throat tightened. How could she explain to them that this mattered more than reputations or donations? How could she admit to herself that she cared not out of pity, but because something about Henry's resilience had touched a part of her she thought had long since hardened? Henry's nights grew darker. He avoided calls, avoided the news, avoided Alexis. He poured himself into work, taking extra shifts, anything to keep his mind busy. Yet every moment alone, her face returned the calm way she had silenced laughter at the restaurant, the way she had knelt beside Zoe at the community center, her laughter as paint smeared her hand. These images clashed violently with the cruel flood of comments online, leaving him torn between hope and humiliation. The breaking point came one night when Zoe padded into his room in her pajamas, holding her stuffed rabbit. She climbed onto his bed and curled beside him. "Daddy, I had a dream Alexis came to my school and clapped when I showed my painting." Her small voice carried a longing that shattered him. He wrapped his arm around her, eyes burning. "That sounds like a good dream, baby." She yawned, drifting back to sleep, but the ache in his chest only deepened. He had convinced himself pushing Alexis away was protection, but it was beginning to feel like abandonment of her, of himself, of something that might have been real. Meanwhile, Alexis sat alone in her penthouse, the city glittering beneath her windows, its lights meaningless. She poured a glass of wine and set it aside untouched. Every call she made to Henry went unanswered. Every silence grew heavier, more suffocating. She replayed the board's words, the pressure of their expectations. But louder still were Zoe's laughter and Henry's steady voice at the restaurant. "We'll sit. We keep our word." She envied that clarity. She envied the strength of a man who could hold his ground under ridicule while she, with all her power, felt chained by perception. Both of them, in different corners of the city, wrestled with the same weight. Henry convinced himself he was unworthy. Alexis feared she would lose everything if she refused to let him go. Their silence stretched into a chasm, each day pulling them further apart, each night deepening the ache. The cruelest part was that neither wanted the distance. But judgment online, in boardrooms, in whispered comments, was louder than the truth they had found in one another. By the week's end, both stood at their lowest. Henry sat at his kitchen table staring at bills, whispering prayers he wasn't sure anyone heard. Alexis stood before her mirror, questioning whether she was strong enough to defy the voices around her. For both, the storm had stripped away pride and left only raw doubt. And though neither knew it yet, they were standing at the edge of the story's darkest valley, the place where hearts either break beyond repair or gather the courage to rise. The ballroom of the Women Who Lead Summit shimmered with crystal light and the soft hum of conversation. Hundreds of women in tailored suits and elegant dresses filled the tables, their name tags flashing with the titles of companies and organizations that shaped the city. The stage was polished oak, the podium engraved with the summit's crest. At the center of it all, Alexis Cole stood just off stage, clutching a stack of note cards she had rehearsed for weeks. The words printed there were safe phrases about growth, sustainability, female empowerment, and the importance of legacy. Words designed to reassure donors, to inspire applause without controversy. Words that would protect her reputation. Yet as she stared at them, the letters blurred. Backstage, a young coordinator approached, whispering, "Miss Cole, you're on in 5. Alexis nodded, forcing composure. She had stood on countless stages, faced presidents and CEOs, delivered keynote speeches that lit up headlines. But tonight her stomach churned. Because tonight, the gap between what she had prepared to say and what weighed on her heart was wider than ever. She stepped to the mirror in the dressing room, adjusting the line of her suit. For a moment, she saw herself as the world did, polished, untouchable, a symbol of success. But behind her eyes, other images surfaced: Zoe's smile as she painted rainbows, Henry's trembling hands gripping the table while laughter filled the restaurant, his quiet strength as he whispered to his daughter, "We'll sit, we keep our word." Those images refused to leave, pressing against her carefully constructed facade until cracks threatened to show. She walked to the podium as the announcer called her name. Applause swelled, polite and expectant. She smiled, thanked them, began her opening lines exactly as written. "Leadership," she said, "is not about power. It is about vision. It is about shaping the future with integrity and resilience." Heads nodded, pens scribbled in notebooks. It was the kind of line she had delivered 100 times before. But her voice wavered when she glanced at the first row and imagined Zoe sitting there, swinging her legs, waiting for something real. She pressed on, speaking of philanthropic investments, the measurable impact of Cole Impact, the millions poured into communities. The audience leaned in with approval, yet inside, her heart recoiled. What good were millions if she couldn't protect the dignity of one man and his child? Her note cards trembled in her hand. She paused, catching herself staring at the neat bullet points. Safe words, empty words. She thought of the board members who had demanded she distance herself, of Vanessa's cruel live stream, of the smirks that had tried to define Henry. She thought of her younger self, abandoned by a fiancé too weak to stand against prejudice. And in that moment, she felt the weight of her own choices pressing down. She could deliver the speech as written, walk off the stage to applause, and remain the flawless figure they expected. Or she could tell the truth, risk it all, and reclaim the humanity that success had nearly stolen. The room waited. A cough, the shuffle of silverware, the flicker of expectation across polished faces. Alexis set the note cards down on the podium. The decision hit her like a rush of cold water, clarifying, bracing. She took a breath and let her voice drop lower, steady but raw. "I came here tonight with a speech," she began. It was full of the right words, numbers, strategies, promises. But as I stand here, I realize those words are not enough. The audience stilled, sensing the shift. Alexis continued, her gaze sweeping across them. "Leadership is not only about vision, it is about courage. Courage to stand beside people when the world mocks them. Courage to defy voices that tell you who you should or should not love. Courage to remember that our humanity is worth more than our image." A ripple ran through the crowd. Some leaned forward, intrigued. Others stiffened, sensing controversy. Alexis pressed on, no longer glancing at her notes. "I was reminded of this not by another CEO or donor, but by a man who sat tall under ridicule so his daughter wouldn't think laughter could break him. I was reminded by a little girl who drew a rainbow that held us all together. They taught me more about dignity than any summit or boardroom ever has." She didn't say Henry's name. She didn't need to. Those who knew the viral video understood at once. Murmurs spread across the ballroom. Phones lifted, recording. The safe speech was gone, replaced by something raw and dangerous. Alexis felt her heart pounding, but with each word she spoke, the weight on her chest lightened. If we, as women who lead, cannot defend dignity in its smallest form, then all our talk of empowerment is meaningless. If we build empires and legacies but abandon the truth when it is inconvenient, then we have built nothing at all. Silence followed her final words, thick and uncertain. Then applause erupted, some hesitant, some thunderous. She couldn't tell which outweighed which, but it didn't matter. For the first time in weeks, she felt whole. She stepped back from the podium, heart racing, vision clear. The path ahead would be dangerous. She knew her board would rage, donors would question, headlines would swirl, but she had made her choice. Backstage again, she leaned against the wall, breathing hard. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over Henry's name. Still no answer. But this time, she didn't feel despair. She felt resolve. She would not let silence or ridicule dictate her steps. She had chosen courage, and now she had to live it. Far across town, Henry sat in his dim apartment, unaware of the speech. He was at the kitchen table again, bills spread before him, Zoe asleep in the next room. He rubbed his face with his hands, exhaustion dragging him down. In the silence, he thought again of Alexis's voice, the way she had said, "Dignity doesn't belong to them, it belongs to you." He didn't know yet that at that very moment, she was standing before the city, choosing to live by those words. The applause from the summit still rang in Alexis's ears as she stepped off stage, heart hammering like she had run a marathon. Assistants rushed forward with congratulations, but their smiles carried unease, the kind that said her words had unsettled the carefully drawn lines of power. One of her board members approached, face taut with controlled fury, whispering, "We'll talk Monday." "You've crossed a line." She nodded politely, refusing to let their disapproval crush the clarity she had found. For once in her life, she didn't care about optics. She cared about truth. She slipped out the side door before the photographers gathered in the lobby, her heels striking against the marble, her breath quick. Outside, the night air hit her face like a baptism. Her driver stood waiting by the black car, door open. "Miss Cole, the car is ready." She looked at the vehicle, sleek and perfect, the symbol of everything she was expected to be. For years, she had entered such cars automatically, sealed off from the city she claimed to serve. Tonight, she couldn't. She shook her head. "Not tonight, thank you." She turned away before the driver could protest, walking quickly down the sidewalk, ignoring the flashing lights of cameras behind her. She didn't have a destination. She only knew she needed to touch the ground that ordinary people walked. A bus rumbled to a stop at the corner, its brakes squealing, doors hissing open. A handful of passengers climbed aboard, an elderly woman with grocery bags, two teenagers laughing, a young man in work boots smelling faintly of dust. Without thinking, Alexis stepped forward, heels clicking against the pavement, and climbed inside. The driver glanced at her tailored suit, at the diamond studs in her ears, then shrugged and said, $2. She reached into her purse and pulled out the bills. For the first time in years, she paid for a ride not with a corporate account or a chauffeur's wage, but with her own cash. She dropped the money into the slot, took her ticket, and found a seat halfway back. The bus jolted forward, the city lights flickering past in blurred streaks. Alexis sat upright, clutching the edge of her seat as though steadying herself not from the motion but from the weight of what she had done. Around her, people laughed, chatted, scrolled on their phones. No one cared who she was. No one bowed. No one whispered about reputations or donors. She was simply another passenger heading through the city. She inhaled deeply, the smell of diesel and old vinyl strangely grounding. For once she wasn't Alexis Cole, Billionaire CEO. She was just a woman moving forward with strangers. Her phone buzzed endlessly, texts from board members, news outlets, colleagues demanding explanations. She silenced it and stared out the window instead. The streets she passed were the same streets Henry swept at night, the same sidewalks where Zoe skipped on her way to school. She had built an empire meant to serve these neighborhoods, yet she had drifted so far from them she barely recognized the cracks in the pavement. Tonight, those cracks felt like home. At one stop, an older woman struggled with her bags. Alexis stood, taking one without hesitation, helping her up the steps. The woman smiled. "Thank you, dear." Not recognizing her, not caring about her name. That simple gratitude struck Alexis harder than all the applause she had left behind. She sat back down, heart steadying. This was where she belonged, not above, not beyond, but within. The bus wound deeper into the city, past blocks where storefronts were shuttered, where children played under dim streetlights. Alexis pressed her hand against the glass, watching faces blur past. She thought of Henry, sitting at his kitchen table with the weight of the world on his shoulders. She thought of Zoe, clutching her rainbow drawing with pride. She knew, with every bump of the bus, that she couldn't let silence win. Not hers, not his. By the time the bus reached her stop, she had made her decision. She would go to him. Not as Alexis Cole, CEO with polished speeches and powerful connections, but as the woman who had sat at his table and seen the strength he carried in the face of humiliation. She would face him in his world, not drag him into hers. The night air greeted her again as she stepped off, her heels clicking against the uneven pavement. She walked the last blocks alone, the city humming around her, alive and imperfect. For the first time in years, she felt she wasn't above the story, she was part of it. Back in his apartment, Henry sat in silence. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, Zoe asleep down the hall. He didn't know that across the city, Alexis was riding a bus, making choices that would change everything. He only knew his phone buzzed again, her name lighting the screen. He stared at it, torn. For the longest time he let it ring, but something in him, small but stubborn, wanted to answer. He didn't, not yet. Instead, he whispered to himself, "She deserves better." He believed it, and yet, he couldn't stop the flicker of hope that maybe she didn't agree. The gymnasium at Maplewood Community Center buzzed with the chaos of children's laughter and the flutter of paper gliding through the air. Henry crouched at a table, his big hands folding paper with surprising precision, showing a cluster of kids how to crease the wings just right. "You fold it here, nice and sharp," he instructed, his voice patient. "Then pinch the nose so it flies straight." Zoe beamed at his side, proudly launching her own creation across the room. The airplane soared before nosediving, sending her into giggles. For a moment, Henry felt peace. Here, in the noise and joy of children, the world's mockery couldn't touch him. Here, he was only a father teaching his daughter and her friends how to believe in simple things that could fly. The sound of doors opening cut through the chatter. Footsteps echoed on the polished floor. Heads turned. Henry didn't notice at first, too focused on helping a boy with crooked folds. But then Zoe gasped, "Daddy, look!" He lifted his head and froze. Alexis stood in the doorway, framed by sunlight, wearing no armor of suits or power, just jeans, a soft blouse, and a face lit by determination. For a second, silence rippled through the room, curiosity sparking. Henry's chest tightened. He hadn't answered her calls, hadn't allowed himself to imagine she would come here, into his world. Yet here she was, crossing the floor with steady steps, her heels clicking until she stopped just before him. Children hushed, sensing something important. Adults paused, eyes wide. Henry straightened slowly, paper still in his hands, his heart thudding against his ribs. "Alexis," he whispered, half disbelief, half warning. She smiled faintly, but her eyes glistened with resolve. She didn't hesitate. She sank down onto one knee before him, the gymnasium gasping as though it had inhaled all at once. Henry's breath caught. He had braced for many things for her to turn away, for her to confirm what the world said about him, but not this. Her voice was strong, echoing through the high ceiling. "Henry Reed, you sat down when the world laughed, so your daughter would know dignity was stronger than cruelty. You taught me more about courage in that moment than I've learned in years of leading empires. Tonight, I stand before you not as a CEO, not as someone people put on pedestals, but as a woman who has found something worth more than reputation. I kneel here to say, I choose you. Not the world's judgment, not the board's approval. You, will you marry me?" The room erupted in whispers, gasps, and then a hush as eyes locked on Henry. He stood frozen, the paper airplane trembling in his fingers. His first instinct was disbelief. How could she mean it? How could a woman like her lower herself before him, here in his place, in front of his people? His pride and his shame battled in silence. But then Zoe's small hand tugged at his sleeve, her voice breaking with joy. "Daddy, does this mean I get a mom? Please say yes." Her eyes shone with hope so pure it shattered the last of his resistance. Henry dropped the paper plane, his throat burned, his vision blurred, but he managed a whisper that grew into a firm, trembling answer. "Yes." He bent, taking Alexis's hand, lifting her from the floor. The room exploded into applause, Cheers from children and adults alike. Zoe squealed, hugging Alexis tightly. "You're really staying? You're really ours?" Alexis laughed through tears. "I've never been surer of anything." 1. She pulled from her pocket a small box, not velvet, not grand, just simple. Inside lay a plain gold band, unadorned, shining with quiet truth. "It's not about diamonds," she said softly, sliding it into Henry's hand. "It's about eternity, about what's real." Henry stared at it, his chest swelling with emotions he had never dared name. He slipped it onto his finger, and in that moment, the noise of the world, laughter, ridicule, whispers faded into nothing. Around them, the community center roared with approval. Children clapped. Volunteers wiped at their eyes. Even the janitor near the back raised a fist in triumph. It wasn't just a proposal. It was a declaration, a defiance, a rewriting of the story that others had tried to twist. Henry pulled Alexis into an embrace, his voice breaking against her ear. "I thought I had to let you go to protect you," she whispered back. "Steady. The only protection I need is the truth, and you." Zoe wedged herself between them, wrapping both arms around their waists, her laughter ringing like bells. In that crowded gym, beneath banners of painted rainbows and paper airplanes fluttering down, they stood not as joke or scandal but as family. A father who chose dignity, a woman who chose courage, and a child who had always believed in both. The fallout came quickly after that day at the community center. The video of Alexis kneeling before Henry spread across the internet as fast as the cruel live streams had before. But this time the story carried a different weight. Clips showed Zoe clapping, the community cheering, Alexis's words ringing out, "I choose you." It was harder for cynicism to twist this one. Where there had been mockery, now there was awe. News anchors debated the courage of a billionaire who defied expectations. Commentators replayed Henry's stunned acceptance, his tears, his embrace with Zoe. And when the dust settled, one truth emerged. The cruel laughter no longer owned the story. Courage did. Vanessa tried to ride the storm, doubling down on her mockery, but the tide turned swiftly. Screenshots of her live stream resurfaced, her taunts dissected, her face linked to cruelty. Employers and neighbors called her out. One evening, she stood outside her own workplace, cameras flashing, reporters firing questions. Her voice shook as she read from a statement. "I deeply regret my actions. My words and behavior were harmful, and I am committed to making amends." The apology was public, but the true reckoning came later, when she was ordered into restorative work, volunteering at the very community center she had once mocked, standing shoulder to shoulder with families she had laughed at. For the first time in her life, she was forced to look dignity in the eye. Henry, for his part, struggled to adjust to the strange glare of public attention. For months, strangers stopped him on the street, some to congratulate, others to gawk. But in the quiet of home, life steadied. Zoe thrived, drawing more rainbows, making more paper planes. Alexis balanced boardrooms with bedtime stories, her schedule reshaped to include dinners at their modest kitchen table. What began as a storm settled into a rhythm that felt almost ordinary, though Henry knew nothing about it was. A year later, the three of them returned to Rosewood Bistro. The chandeliers still gleamed, the tables still filled with polished laughter, but tonight, the atmosphere carried no sting. Henry walked in with Alexis's hand in his, Zoe skipping beside them. The host recognized them instantly, stammering before guiding them at their request to table 12. Henry sat down slowly, his chest tight with memory. But instead of cruel eyes and hidden cameras, he saw only Zoe's joy and Alexis's smile. This time, the table belonged to them. Dinner was quiet, peaceful, even joyful. Zoe colored on her menu, adding stick figures once again, this time with 3 people beneath the rainbow. She slid it across the table. "That's us, forever." Alexis kissed her forehead. Henry's eyes misted, but he smiled. The pain of that night was still there, but now it was woven into something larger, proof that dignity had outlived cruelty. Afterward, they walked to the corner of Maple Lane, where a new banner stretched across the community center's entrance. Makers and Arts on Maple Lane, sponsored by Coal Impact, inspired by Henry and Zoe. Inside, children crowded around tables, painting, building, creating, while single parents found support and connection. It was more than a program. It was a promise that no one would be left to face ridicule alone, that dignity would be honored, not mocked. Henry stood at the entrance, watching kids laugh and parents exhale relief, and he felt a pride deeper than any paycheck had ever given. Alexis slipped her hand into his, whispering, "This is just the beginning." That night, as Zoe fell asleep with her paper planes scattered around her bed, Henry sat by the window, the city stretching out beyond. He thought of all that had happened, the laughter, the shame, the courage, the proposal, the redemption. He thought of Vanessa, now painting murals at Maplewood as part of her restitution, her smirk long gone, her hands stained with colors instead of cruelty. He thought of Alexis, asleep in the next room, her ring glinting on the nightstand, not as a trophy but as a truth. His voice was low, steady, carrying to no one and everyone at once, like a whisper into the night air. Cruelty spreads fast. It burns bright, but only for a moment. Courage lasts. If someone had been listening, perhaps through a radio, perhaps only in spirit, they would have heard the truth of it. The world's mockery had faded, but the choice to sit tall, to keep his word to Zoe, to hold dignity above shame, that choice had become a story others could carry. A story not about scandal or spectacle, but about love, resilience, and the quiet triumph of standing tall when the world tells you to bow. This story reminds us that cruelty is loud but fleeting, while courage is quiet and enduring. It shows that dignity does not belong to the wealthy, the powerful, or the privileged. It belongs to anyone willing to stand tall when mocked, to choose truth over fear, and to love in the face of judgment. In a world quick to laugh at weakness, Henry, Alexis, and Zoe prove that the real strength is found in compassion, in loyalty, and in the simple act of choosing one another against all odds.